dealing here with a question that I think vexes a lot of people because it's been a point of a lot of discussions is who exactly is this Malkitsedeq, and who gave to whom, all these questions about tithing, the order of Malkitsedeq, and all these different questions. Now, I've actually spoken about the whole question of the order of Malkitsedeq before, and it seems to be that people in time, in history, started to admire this character known as Malkitsedeq and to try to attribute him some kind of a priesthood. It seems to be that it became very popular to claim that someone is of the priesthood of Malkitsedeq, and today churches use this, and a lot of teachers out there try to claim that they're entitled to tithing, which is really something the Kohanim and the Leviim are supposed to receive, and not something that a regular layman or even a teacher should receive. However, I'm going to say this from the get-go. If there are teachers and they do a good work and you like what they do, that you should help them out. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I just think that the idea of claiming that you're supposed to receive a tithe is usurping something that belongs to someone else. And this has nothing to do with the fact that I'm a Levite. I'm just trying to teach the truth of what the Tanakh actually says. So I've done recordings about tithing. I've done this several times, but this time I want to actually present it with the screen so people can actually see the text itself and see what I'm referring to. So the text we actually have here is from Genesis 14, and we're specifically going to focus on a couple verses here. And the premise of what I'm going to say in this section here is that really when you look at the text, Malkitsedeq is the one that does everything. It's very common that people say, oh, Abraham gave to Malkitsedeq, but this actually ignores the Hebrew grammar. It ignores who is what's known as the nominus causis, the causing noun, not necessarily subject, because the definition of subject, object, and so on is too abstract to really understand how languages work. So this is what we call as a causing noun. Malkitsedeq is not the center, but he is the one that does everything. And the sequence here in verse 18, 19, and 20 is that Malkitsedeq is the one that speaks to Abraham, he blesses Abraham, and so on. It says in verse 18, Malkitsedeq melech Shalem, Malkitsedeq king of Shalem, hotzi lechem veyayin, brought out bread and wine. V'hu chohen le'el elyon, and he is a priest to El Elyon. So one of the questions is, why does the text mention that he is a priest to El Elyon? I think that it's important to point out here that this gives Malkitsedeq not only authority as a king, but also the authority of a priest. He's the absolute authority of the city known as Shalem. If it is Jerusalem or not, highly debated. There is a place known as Shalem, which was not too far away from Shechem, from what's known as Nablus of today. If this is the same Shalem as here, it's a good question, because the way this piece of information is placed in here, it actually interrupts the meeting between Abraham and the king of Sodom. And what we actually have here is an insertion of information that probably belongs to a different place, but was put in there because there was no other place to put it in. And I would argue that one of the reasons it's placed here is also the mention of El Elyon, because Abraham uses the term El Elyon. And there's a whole question here of the names of God and so on, which is a pretty tricky subject. But it's placed here because Abraham uses the term El Elyon earlier, but it doesn't turn Malkitsedeq into some kind of a Kohen that Avraham has to give him respect. But Malkitsedeq is mentioned here also with his title. And it says in verse 19, Vayivarechehu, and he blessed him. Who did he bless? It continues, it says, Vayomer Baruch Avram le'el Elyon koneh shamayim va'aretz. Blessed is Avraham to El Elyon, the creator of heaven and earth. Now, creator of heaven and earth is actually an Israelite term. Scholars identified terms like kan shamayim or kan aretz, but never koneh shamayim va'aretz, creator of heavens and earth, because the gods in general were usually associated to a very specific thing, heaven, earth, trees, whatever it might be. And here God is referred to as creator of heavens and earth, and heaven and earth is a term that really indicates everything. Okay, it doesn't just indicate heaven and earth, it really all of creation. And he says, Uvaruch El Elyon, and blessed is El Elyon, Asher migen tzarecha be'yadecha, who gave your enemies in your hand, Ve'iten lo ma'aser mikol, and he gave him a tenth from everything. normal reader and normal grammar of this entire section clearly indicates that the doer of the action and the one that gives the tithe is Malkitsedeq. There is no doubt about this. Anyone who tries to reverse this is ignoring a very simple rule, which actually was established by Simcha Kogot in his book about Hebrew grammar, that anytime you have a change in main actors in a storyline, you will have to switch. They have to show that there's a switch. And here, there's no switch. The doer of the action is Malkitsedeq, and the reason is because this entire section with Malkitsedeq is isolated from the rest of the storyline. It's placed here almost artificially into the story, and this is why Avraham is not really interacting here, because this is an insertion of information. It's actually detached from everything. And really, when you go to verse 21, suddenly Vayomer Melech Sdom el Avraham. Suddenly the king of Sodom speaks. Wait, where's Malkitsedeq? Who's doing what here? What exactly is going on here? And this has actually brought different scholars to realize that what we're actually looking at here is two different storylines placed into one place because of certain associations, and not necessarily that these happen at the same time. Because Shalem, even if we say it's Jerusalem, is all the way up in the mountains, and the valley of Shaveh, the valley of the king, is probably somewhere way down in the valley, the Jordan Valley. So it doesn't seem to be that these people actually came in contact with one another. The other thing is that there's this claim that Malkitsedeq and the king of Sodom are placed here as opposites. Malkitsedeq is the one that gives, and there's never objection from Avraham, while the king of Sodom wants to give, and Avraham rejects it, because Avraham recognizes that the king Malkitsedeq is a righteous king. He is a king that he can identify with, while the king of Sodom is a king that he cannot identify with, and therefore he doesn't want any part in what the king of Sodom has to offer. So there's several things here. There's grammar, there's a literature analysis, there's concepts analysis here, but it doesn't seem to be that Malkitsedeq is some kind of a separate priesthood. So the question that's raised is, where does this concept of of the order of Malkitsedeq come from? So obviously we have some 110 that mentions Malkitsedeq, and it refers to Malkitsedeq as a Kohen, and so on, and there's some kind of words of appraisal here to Malkitsedeq. But the problem is that the context there seems to be more a context of kingship and not priesthood. And the idea also of to be a Kohen is to be in service. So a king is a type of Kohen because he is mechahen. He is in position. To be a Kohen really means, at least in latter Hebrew, really means that one is in a position. But really, the Chahen, to be a Kohen, is not an abstract term. It really has to do with a verbal concept of being in service. So a Kohen is really a person of service, which raises questions about Kohanim today, if we can really refer to them as a Kohen, because they're not really in service anymore. But because they are descendants of people who did service, we still refer to them as Kohen, and this is why the family name Kohen, Kahana, all the different things that use the term Kohen. So the question that's raised, who started this idea that there's a priestly line known as Malkitsedeq, and that they can also function as kings? And the people who come to mind are the Hasmoneans. The Hasmoneans at one point, we're not too sure exactly when, there's a bit of a debate about that, but the Hasmoneans at some point, either around the time of Yonatan the high priest, which is 134 BC to 104, or Aristobulus 104 to 103, one of them started this idea. This is the main theory, but there are other theories as well. Some people even date it much, much later, maybe to the Aristobulus II, known as Yehuda Aristobulus. It's not really clear, but the question that's raised here is, why did this begin? We need to understand the overall social issue that was going on at the time. And the issue was that there were different groups struggling with one another over control of the temple, control of Israel, control of Judea in general. And these different groups were struggling with one another. And you had people who were Kohanim, who were persecuted. If we, for example, take Rachel Eliul's theory regarding the Dead Sea Scrolls, and she claims that these are priests from the house of Tzadok that were persecuted, and this is why they speak a lot against the wicked priest, the Kohen Resha, and they're referred to as the Kohen Tzedek, and using the word Tzedek is not arbitrary, also refers to the concept of being Tzadok, and they were persecuted out of the temple and had to run away. And because of this tension between the groups, the Hasmoneans had to try to justify who they were. Now, the work of an historian is not just reading history books, it's also looking inside the information, trying to find little hints here and there. So one of the things I was doing was I was reading an article that deals with the Hasmonean period, and now I'm going to switch here to a different screen. I'm going to enlarge this just so it's a little bit bigger and you can see it better. And I'm only using Hebrew text here. These are all texts which are much easier for to really see how it's presented, because certain terms are lost when you use them in English because it's translated from Latin or Greek or even Aramaic. The Aramaic would be better, but this version, as far as I know, there's only a Latin and bits and pieces of the Greek version. And one of the things that happens is historians try to read between the lines about words or terms which are used. And one of the terms that we find here in one of the Jewish apocryphas known as the Ascension of Moses, there's another name that I've seen, but Aliyat Moshe means to ascend. And the idea itself is that when we see a text use a term, there must be a hint here. We need to understand also the way polemics worked back then, apologetic writings, how they worked. And one of the things they would do is they would use terms that for us, we just read through them and we don't recognize what we're reading. But as an historian, you read slowly, oh wait, no, he's using something very specific here. This is not just there because they can. And one of the interesting things that Daniel Schwartz, one of the scholars that I had to read about this subject, points out in an article that he wrote in a book. This is actually a collection of articles, and the one I found was actually in a book known as the Hasmonean State, the history of the Hasmoneans during the Hellenistic period. It's a collection of articles. It's actually in Hebrew by Yad Ben Tzvi, which is a publication in Jerusalem that you can find online. I don't know if they've ever translated. Maybe there are some translations. I don't know. But what he points out, there are several sources that mention the term El Elyon in association with what we understand to be the Hasmoneans. And what's interesting is in chapter 6 of this book, verse 1, it says, Az ya'amdu lahem melachim mushlim. And then they would have standing, basically, come into power, ruling kings, v'choanei El Elyon, and priests of El Elyon. Now, person who just reads through this says, oh, okay, he's using one term. But no, it seems to be that he's specifically referring here to a title the Hasmoneans took for themselves to justify their position. This is what Schwartz actually says. From the Apocrypha, Ascension of Moses, from Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews, chapter 16, passage 163, and from the external material of the Talmud, like the Babylonian Talmud, Rosh Hashanah, Tractate Rosh Hashanah, chapter, page 18, side B, and the Skilion to the book of the Megillat Ta'anit, which is an interesting document about the Hasmonean period, before the Hasmonean period, during the war against the Seleucians. He says, we learned that the Hasmoneans used to refer themselves as Kohanim Le'el Elyon, as priests to El Elyon. And the question is raised about this: what was the reason why did they want to use this title? The answer seems to be, and I'm translating from Hebrew, the answer seems to be very clear that this term is taken out of Genesis 14:18, and it is clearly the term used to describe Malkitsedeq, king of Shalem, that might be Jerusalem, and he is a Kohen to El Elyon. Meaning that anyone who go to the Hasmoneans and the late Hasmoneans and argue against them with the claim that they do not have the right to have the royal crown, they will, because they already have the priestly crown or the priesthood, will find a prepared answer. The same way that Malkitsedeq, a glorified character in the book of Psalms, Psalm 110 verse 4, was allowed to combine both crowns, so do we. Basically, Daniel Schwartz understands this, that the Hasmoneans started this concept, or maybe played off of something that was slightly hinted in the world, in their world at that time, but played off of that and said, no, we're allowed to be kings and priests, basically creating this fake legitimacy of having such thing as a priesthood of Malkitsedeq. How can a king be a priest? How a person who's technically not supposed to be a Kohen? Well, in truth, they were Kohanim as well, but how can they be kings and priests together? They said, oh, I am a priest of Malkitsedeq, which makes me king and priest. Now, another piece of information that we have from much, much later, hundreds of years later, but still worth looking at. And by the way, it's very important to point out, the Ascension of Moses, like many books of the Apocrypha, were books that were written much, much later. A lot of people try to play off of the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilee and so on. And these are very, very late books. These books were not written at the period you think they were. And this is a very, very common mistake. And people that try to promote certain ideas play off of this. And I have to say this very bluntly, the language used in these books, the descriptions, the concepts, the theology, it all dates to the Second Temple period, and very, very late in the Second Temple period. But in any case, the Ascension of Moses was written around the time when the Hasmoneans were still in power, and this was a critique of who they were. And using the term El Elyon was a hint to them. And basically what the section we saw them mentioning that they were kings and priests was a complaint about this corruption. The next thing that we actually have is in the Talmud, which is hundreds of years later, but it's still very interesting. This is Talmud Rosh Hashanah, page 18b, and it mentions here at the bottom that because the Malchut Yavan, the kingdom of Greece, which was really Syrians, these were the Seleucians, forbade mentioning the name of God, they decided that the name of God will be on the lips of people. Now, this might be also connected to the prohibition of mentioning the name, a prohibition well known in Judaism. But what we actually have here is that they decreed that the name of Shem Shamayim Al Piem, not to mention the name of the heavens, which is God, on the mouth, and when the house of Hashmonai defeated them, they made a takana, they decreed that they will mention the name of God even in afilu bashtarot, even in documents. Basically, any official documents, they will say, and this is what they wrote, Bishnat kach v'kach, in the year such and such, Liochanan Kohen Gadol le'el Elyon. They mentioned that he's Yochanan, who is Kohen Gadol, and he's the Kohen Gadol to El Elyon. He's the high priest to El Elyon. And this Yochanan is Yochanan Holkinus. This is the year 134 to 104, actually probably even earlier than that, but Yochanan, no, this will be Yochanan Holkinus. So, by the way, mentioning Yochanan Holkinus here at this stage, already after Shimon was elected high priest, this shows a certain anachronism here, and we have to be very careful with historical information mentioned in the Talmud, and what one should and may should argue here is this is a misunderstanding. It wasn't Yochanan, and they attribute a lot of things to Yochanan. It was probably with other members of the family as well. But the point is that they would mention themselves. Yochanan, for example, mentioned himself as a priest to El Elyon. And this indicates that they were the ones who actually used this title. So to sum all this up, there seems to be some historical evidence that the term El Elyon was used by the priests of the house of Hashmonai to give them legitimacy as priests and kings. And this probably opened up more this idea that there could be some kind of a priesthood that is not the priesthood of Tzadok, which is not the priesthood of the house of Aaron. And this might be, and again, this is still, this is trying to find information out of small things, out of small pieces of information which are scattered all over the place. It seems to be that there is no order of Malkitsedeq. Al-Dibrati Malkitsedeq, Al-Dibrati doesn't mean order. It actually probably comes from the word davar, which means my promise, the promise to David to be the kings. And the context really of Psalm 110 is probably kingship and not priesthood. And really this idea of having a priestly line outside of the house of Tzadok, outside of priests which who are real descendants of the house of Aaron, seems to be something that had to do with politics and control and power, and there really is no order of Malkitsedeq. Now, I know some teachers, I've actually had some teachers contact me and get really upset with me for attacking these things. I'm not attacking. The point here to be made is that the priesthood is the priesthood. If you're a teacher and you're not a Cohen, you don't really have a right to ask for a tithe. However, I always say this, and every time I talk about this subject, I always point this out. If there's a teacher and they do a good job, I think it's correct to give these teachers a gift, so these teachers are able to take care of themselves and be able to go and teach and find this information, take the time to teach, and so on. And that's the point I make. I don't think it's right to say tithe, but I think it is right to give teachers a gift because of the work they do. In any case, I might have upset some people here. I might have actually made some people very happy. The point is, this is information. You do with it what you understand. If you disagree with me, you disagree with me. You agree with me, you're agreeing with me. The point is, this is information that I found, and I'm presenting it to the public. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this was interesting. I hope this was informative. You can also go visit me on my website, HebrewInIsrael.wix.com. Yes, I know the Wix name is confusing. It's just, that's the name I have at the moment, and I'm going to use that for a while. You can also visit me on Facebook, Hebrew in Israel with Yoel Halevi, and you can also email me, Hebrew in Israel, one word, Hebrew in Israel, @gmail.com. Kol tov.